Lord of Mystery's first closed beta just wrapped up, and if you've been looking for gameplay footage or streams, you unfortunately won't find any. Heavy NDA restrictions in China meant that nobody could record or share anything publicly without facing repercussions, which leaves us completely in the dark about what this game actually is. That's why this detailed review matters so much more. It's from a Chinese player who spent serious hours in the beta and even attended an offline test in Shanghai where they talked directly with the developers. So right off the bat, the reviewer mentions this is still the first beta test, which means content can change at any time. The main goal here is to see how solid the game's foundation is, basically stress testing the core systems. The reviewer mentions that they previously participated in an offline test in Shanghai and had an in-depth discussion with the developers, which gives them some insider perspective on where the team's head is at. One thing they specifically called out is that they personally care a lot about endgame PvP, and apparently the developers place great importance on this aspect too. Even in this first test, they already included competitive arenas, group battles, guild wars, open world PvP, and even massive city wars involving thousands of players. After spending several days deep diving into all of this, the reviewer still rated the experience as top tier. Now whether that holds up long term with full servers and after the new game excitement fades, we'll have to see. But under beta conditions with presumably a smaller, more dedicated testing population, it apparently worked really well. Beyond just PvP, the MMO mechanics are currently described as very polished. You've got the dungeons and PvP obviously, but also casual activities, exploration content, cosmetics and social features. They are clearly going for that complete MMO experience rather than focusing on just one aspect. There are also plans to introduce a role-playing or acting mechanic that is similar to the original novel. If you've read Lord of the Mysteries, you know that the acting method is central to how the power system works. Pathways require you to act out your role to digest potions and advance. Whether that's actually going to translate into engaging gameplay mechanics remains to be seen. Here's where everyone gets nervous with Chinese MMOs, right? The monetization mainly focuses on cosmetics, similar to Justice Online or Where Winds Meet. They mentioned that the Lord of Mysteries skillfully blends the strengths of both titles. On paper that sounds reasonable, both of those games are generally considered to have decent monetization models that aren't too aggressively pay to win. But beta monetization often looks friendlier than what we get when the game actually releases. Now this is actually an interesting structural choice they made. For the story content, there is a dedicated action camera perspective that is supposed to provide an experience similar to AAA single-player games. Graphically, it performs really well thanks to Unreal Engine 5, which should mean decent visuals and performance. As you transition into the endgame MMO content, you can zoom the camera out into a traditional MMO perspective. The reviewer says it's intuitive and easy to pick up. What this means practically is you're getting two different experiences in one package, a story-driven single-player style mode and a traditional MMO endgame. Whether that appeals to you depends on what you're looking for in a game. The MMO uses a seasonal system with multiple progression paths leading to the same goal, along with the daily caps. This is actually pretty important even during the early progression phase. Playing 2 to 3 hours a day is apparently enough to keep up with everyone else. For people with jobs and other commitments, this sounds decent on paper. Daily caps prevent no-lifers from getting months ahead of the casual players by grinding 16 hours a day. Whether it feels rewarding or becomes tedious is something we won't know until we actually play. Alright, so this is where the reviewer gets into the specifics of how spending money actually affects your power, and honestly this is probably what most people care about. The impact of spending on character stats mainly shows up in 3 ways. Bidding for gear to speed up the progression, pulling skills early to graduate your build faster, and gambling on better random substats. Here is the key breakdown though. 80% of your attributes come from grinding, while the remaining 20% are influenced by money and luck. So it seems that it's not like you can just swipe your credit card and become untouchable. There is a structure here that keeps grinding as a primary source of power. More importantly, spending money cannot infinitely widen the power gap because the ceiling is hard capped. Even if someone whales out millions, at most they'll have an advantage in a 1v1 situation. But if they get jumped by a few grinder players who have kept up with the progression, they will still be defeated. Basically, numbers beat wallet. It is the smartest part of the system in my opinion. Once the season or yearly reset hits and the new gear is released, the stats you paid for become obsolete. Your progress resets. This fundamentally changes the value proposition of spending money on power versus spending it on cosmetics. If your paid advantage disappear every season, why spend on them at all? This way, it's much more reliable to spend on cosmetics, which is exactly what the developers want to incentivize. Speaking of cosmetics, the game specifically created a beauty or a fashion contest for cosmetics enthusiasts. Within guilds, you can participate in competitions where players are rated on whose outfit coordination scores the highest. This is actually a clever way to give cosmetic purchases gameplay value beyond just looking good. If there's an actual competitive element to fashion, people who care about that have their own endgame content separate from combat. Dungeons follow the traditional tank DPS healer setup similar to Justice Online. You've got 6-player dungeons, large raids, and AI-assisted easy mode with no major optimization issues that are mentioned. The early game team dungeons are described as a breeze, which makes sense for teaching mechanics without punishing new players. But late game difficulty scales up significantly to something like Jade Dynasty, 5-player nightmare modes and 10-player hard modes. It's also emphasized that these are genuinely challenging and not just baby mode dungeons that you can autopilot through. Whether the difficulty is tuned or just artificially inflated, we won't know until we try it ourselves. Then the reviewer calls PvP one of the game's biggest highlights, which tracks with them mentioning earlier that they care a lot about endgame PvP. There's a guild-based faction system with random assignments and the content includes 500-player faction wars and 1,000-player city battles. Now here's the claim that really stands out. Optimization is apparently excellent. Even with 100 plus players and effects on screen, there is supposedly no lag. If this holds true at launch with full servers, that's genuinely impressive. But beta optimization with controlled testing population versus launch day chaos with overloaded servers, those are two very different scenarios. Faction wars play like point capture plus payload push. It's 4 factions competing against each other, so not just a simple two-sided battle. The variety of having 4 sides could make things more dynamic and unpredictable compared to the standard 2-faction systems. City wars sound more elaborate and honestly pretty epic in concept. Here's how they work. You depart from your base, use vehicles to advance to the city, deploy siege engines, and break through gates. Dragons may even appear during battles, which adds that fantasy spectacle element. Once the gates break, everyone floods into the Imperial City to see who claims Shabak first. Again, if the technical side holds up, this could be genuinely impressive content. Big if though. We all know how Throne of Liberty sieges end up. The game includes 2 storylines, an original story and an adaptation of the novel, with very rich narrative gameplay according to the review. Based on the novel settings, they added many fun and creative elements that show they understand the source material. The game map is described as extremely large. Currently Tengen is open for the beta, which is the starting city from the novel, but you can already see places like Backlund, the Faesak Empire, the Forsaken Lands of the Gods, Sonia Islands, East Balam, West Balam and more. For novel readers, these are all iconic locations, so seeing them all planned for inclusion shows the scope they're aiming for. Whether they can actually fill all these locations with meaningful content or if some will feel empty, that's a real question. Big maps don't mean much if there's nothing interesting to do in them. Sequence advancement requires collecting and consuming potions, which is exactly how the power system works in the novel. You gather ingredients, brew a potion, drink it, and advance to the next sequence if you've properly digested your current one through acting. The first season will likely cap around sequence 6. For reference, the sequence system goes from 9, which is the weakest, to 0, which is the strongest. So sequence 6 is roughly mid-tier power. There were apparently rumors about pulling characters gacha style, which would be pretty bad. But that's not actually how it works. The system lets you pull character skills, not full characters like typical gacha games. This is a meaningful distinction because you're not locked out of entire playstyles or character classes based on gacha luck. You will have access to your chosen pathway, but the skills within that pathway can be pulled to expand your toolkit. Sealed artifacts can also be equipped to grant passive effects. And importantly, they are earned through grinding, not gacha. So the gacha is limited to skills, and even for those you're not gambling for power levels. Once you pull or unlock skills, the stats are fixed. You don't have to grind materials to level them up, like in many other gacha games, though you can fuse them later for upgrades. This is way less predatory than systems where you need multiple copies of the same thing to max it out. Now this is where the reviewer gets into what might be the game's strongest selling point for a certain audience. They mention asking many veteran Justice Online players why they don't try other MMOs. And the answer wasn't that those games are bad or they lack time. They've simply gotten used to convenience and become lazy, while most other MMOs feel too complex and troublesome. The reviewer thinks this is exactly one key reason why Lord of Mysteries could succeed. While keeping manual gameplay fun, it makes the experience even more convenient than Justice Online. Here are some of the concrete examples given. If you're missing the last treasure chest or some collectible, instead of searching guides online, you can just press one button and the game auto-paths you there. You don't have to grind materials to level up your inner power traits. Once you pull or unlock them, the stats are fixed, though you can fuse them later. Before a raid, you can click the boss's avatar to see a full preview of its skills and mechanics. That last one especially should be standard in every MMO, but often isn't. After playing for a while, the only flaws the reviewer could nitpick are hardware-related ones. Graphics quality and combat impact are indeed not as good as Korean MMOs, and the freedom level isn't comparable to AAA single-player games like GTA or Elden Ring. But here's the thing, almost no domestic Chinese games can achieve those standards anyway, so it's understandable and somewhat expected. The reviewer identifies what the game currently lacks: more PvX activities, content that blends PvE and PvP elements, and more cosmetic content. These are both expandable over time, so not necessarily deal breakers for a beta. Then the development direction is as follows: reducing stat gaps between players, less grinding requirements, less pay-to-win mechanics, and adopting a seasonal system. All these point toward a more fair, time-respectful experience rather than a hardcore grindfest or pay-to-win cash grab. At least that is the stated intention. The time will tell. And then the reviewer summarizes it nicely. If you take the story mode on its own, it is essentially a free single-player action RPG. If it were sold on Steam, it would be worth around $15–20. Any higher would be pushing it in terms of comparing it to the AAA masterpieces, as it hasn't reached that peak just yet. If you take the MMO mode on its own, it's basically a Western fantasy version of Justice Online, but with even richer dungeons and PvP content, so you're getting both in one package. Whether that's a good value depends on how much you would actually engage with each mode and whether the monetization stays as reasonable as it sounds. And that's pretty much everything. So here's where things stand. On paper, a lot of this sounds thoughtful. Hard caps on monetization, quality of life features, time-friendly progression, faithful lore adaptation. The PvP scale is ambitious, optimization claims are impressive if they are true. But we are looking at beta impressions under heavy NDA with zero footage, from one person's perspective, and things can change dramatically before launch. Chinese MMOs have a mixed track record, some deliver on promises, others don't. Beta monetization especially can look very different when the game actually releases. I am cautiously interested. There's enough here that sounds decent to keep watching, but not enough confirmed information to get excited or worried about. If you're a Lord of Mysteries fan, you will probably try it regardless. If you're looking for a new MMO, it might be worth forming your own opinion at launch. If you are already skeptical of Chinese MMOs, nothing here will likely change your mind. We will get more information as we get closer to the next testing phase or launch. Until then, this review is all we've got, since footage doesn't exist thanks to NDA restrictions. Let me know in the comments what you think. Are you interested in trying this? Are you skeptical? Or just curious about how it develops? I'd like to hear your take. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.